I never imagined my life would spiral out of control so fast. My name is Karen Thompson, 36 years old, a marketing manager at a successful firm in downtown Seattle. I've always been the perfect wife on the surface, married to David Thompson, 39, a dedicated software engineer and loving father to our 2 children, Sophia, 14, and Ethan, 11. We've been together for 15 years. Our marriage, though stable, had grown stale. Routine replaced passion, and silence filled the spaces where laughter used to live. I felt invisible. David worked late nights, always buried in code, and I made a mistake, a monumental, unforgivable mistake. His name was Ryan Cooper, 32, a fitness trainer at the gym I started going to after my birthday. Ryan was everything David wasn't anymore: attentive, exciting, spontaneous. It started innocently, a few harmless conversations during my workouts, a compliment here, a flirtatious joke there. I should have stopped it then, but I didn't. One thing led to another, and soon, I found myself sneaking around, craving the thrill Ryan brought into my life. I justified it by telling myself that David didn't care about me anymore, that he'd never find out. I was wrong. The night everything fell apart. It was a Thursday evening, one of David's usual late nights. Or so I thought. I told him I had a work dinner and arranged for Ryan to come over. My heart raced as I set the scene: candles, wine, and music playing softly in the background. Ryan arrived, and the moment he walked through the door, my guilt evaporated, replaced by the adrenaline of doing something forbidden. We were in the bedroom, lost in the heat of the moment, when I heard the front door slam. My stomach dropped. "Karen?" David's voice echoed through the house. Panic surged through me. "It's okay," Ryan whispered, but it wasn't. It was far from okay. David's footsteps thundered up the stairs, and before I could react, he burst into the bedroom. There he stood, my husband, the father of my children, the man I vowed to love forever, staring at us in disbelief. His face turned pale, then red with rage. "What the hell is this?" David roared, his voice shaking the walls. I scrambled to cover myself, stammering useless apologies, but the damage was done. Ryan tried to speak, but David lunged at him, fists flying. The room erupted into chaos. They crashed into the nightstand, shattering the lamp. I screamed for them to stop, but David was relentless. He threw Ryan out of the house, literally. Ryan stumbled down the front steps, half-dressed, as neighbors peeked out of their windows. The kids saw everything. I thought the worst was over, but I was wrong again. As I tried to calm David down, I heard a small, trembling voice behind me. "Mom?" I turned to see Sophia and Ethan standing at the top of the stairs, their faces a mixture of confusion and horror. They'd seen everything: Ryan, the fight, the betrayal. My heart shattered as Sophia clutched Ethan's hand and glared at me. "How could you do this?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean." I couldn't even finish the sentence. "How do you explain something like this to your children?" David's rage. David didn't let up. After shoving Ryan out, he grabbed his keys and stormed back into the house, his voice dripping with venom. "I want you out of this house, Karen. Now. You're disgusting. I can't even look at you." "David, please, let's talk about this," I begged, falling to my knees. But he was beyond reason. "Talk? You want to talk, after what you just did? In our bed, while our kids were home?" He laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable." He started throwing my clothes into a suitcase, hurling them across the room. I tried to stop him, but he brushed past me, muttering, "You ruined everything." The neighbors and family drama. By now, the commotion had attracted the neighbors. I saw Mrs. Jenkins from across the street whispering to someone on her phone, undoubtedly spreading the news like wildfire. My humiliation was complete when David called my mother, yes, my mother, and told her everything. "Your daughter is a lying, cheating snake," he spat into the phone. "I'm done with her." I could hear my mother's voice on the other end, shocked and disappointed. "Karen, what is he talking about?" she asked when he handed me the phone. "Mom," my voice broke, and I couldn't get the words out. Within hours, the entire family knew. My sister, Jessica, 34, called to berate me, saying, "How could you do this to David? To your kids? You're disgusting." The aftermath that night. By midnight, I was sitting in a cheap motel room with a half-packed suitcase and mascara streaked down my face. David had locked me out of the house, and the kids refused to answer my calls. I stared at my phone, watching as messages from friends and family poured in, each one more damning than the last. "You deserve everything coming to you. I hope David takes the kids and leaves you with nothing. Don't ever call me again." I felt like my entire world had imploded, and the worst part? It was all my fault. But this was only the beginning. I spent that entire sleepless night at the motel, staring at the stained ceiling and replaying everything in my head. The shame was suffocating, but the thought of losing my children made it unbearable. I kept texting Sophia and Ethan, begging for forgiveness. No reply. David hadn't called, and my family's silence felt like a death sentence. But something unexpected happened the next morning, something that turned the tide in a way I never anticipated. It was Ryan, a call from the man who started it all. My phone buzzed at 6:43 am, his name flashing on the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity, or desperation, got the better of me. "What do you want?" I hissed into the phone, barely able to mask my anger. "Karen, you need to listen to me," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Oh, now you're serious? After everything blew up in my face? Listen, this isn't just about us." "What are you talking about?" There was a pause, and then Ryan said something that made my blood run cold. "David hired a private investigator. He's been watching us for weeks. He knew, Karen. He's known for a while." David's plan revealed. At first, I thought Ryan was bluffing. David was always the calm, level-headed one. The idea of him hiring a spy to follow me around seemed absurd. But then, I remembered how distant he had been in the last month. The late nights, the passive-aggressive comments about trust, the way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. It all started to make sense. "Why would he do that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because he wanted proof," Ryan said bluntly. "He has photos, Karen, of us, at the gym, at the bar, and in your bedroom. He's using it to turn your family and the kids against you." My knees buckled, and I sat on the edge of the motel bed, my head spinning. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was war. David's calculated revenge. The pieces fell into place quickly after that. I called my sister, Jessica, hoping to reason with her, but she cut me off before I could even start. "You're disgusting, Karen. Do you know what you've done to your kids?" "Jess, please. Just listen to me. Did David tell you about the pie?" Her silence spoke volumes. "He did, didn't he?" I pressed. Jessica hesitated. "Of course, he did. And you know what? Good for him. You deserve everything coming to you." I hung up, shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. David wasn't just angry, he was orchestrating my downfall. The secret behind David's late nights. Fueled by desperation, I decided to confront David. I drove back to the house, knowing he wouldn't let me in but needing answers anyway. I parked on the street and waited until I saw him leave for work. As soon as his car disappeared down the road, I broke into the house using the spare key I knew he hadn't thought to change yet. I headed straight for his home office, digging through drawers, emails, anything that could confirm Ryan's story. And then I found it, a manila folder tucked inside a locked drawer which I pried open with a letter opener. Inside were printed photos of me and Ryan kissing in the parking lot at the gym, sitting too close at a bar, sneaking into my house. My heart sank lower with every image. But what really caught my attention was a series of receipts stapled to the back of the folder, payments to a private investigator named Marcus Hale. David had been planning this for weeks, if not months. But why? Why not confront me when he first suspected? Then I saw it, a handwritten note at the bottom of one of the pages. "Let her dig her own grave. Custody battle leverage." He was fighting for the kids. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about revenge. David wasn't just angry, he was strategic. He wanted full custody of Sophia and Ethan, and he was building an airtight case against me. Adultery, neglect, moral unfitness, he was going to use every weapon at his disposal to ensure I'd never see my children again. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the folder to my chest. The photos, the receipts, the notes, it was all too much. I thought I'd been clever, sneaking around behind his back, but I was the one being played. Ryan's confession. Later that day, I met Ryan at a coffee shop to confront him about his involvement. "Did you know about this?" I demanded, slamming the folder onto the table between us. His face turned pale as he flipped through the photos. "Karen, I didn't know he'd go this far." "Bullshit. You knew something. Why else would you call me this morning?" Ryan leaned in, his voice low. "Okay, fine. I knew he was suspicious. He came to the gym once, said he was looking for a trainer, but I could tell he was watching us. I didn't think he'd actually hire someone." I stared at him, the realization dawning that I couldn't trust anyone, not David, not Ryan, not even myself. The twist: Ryan's hidden agenda. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, Ryan dropped another bombshell. "Look, Karen, there's something else you need to know," he said, avoiding my eyes. "What now?" I snapped, exhausted from the endless barrage of bad news. I've been talking to David." My jaw dropped. What the hell are you talking about? After he came to the gym, he offered me money to end things with you. He said he'd pay me $10,000 to break it off and give him everything he needed to win custody. I didn't take it, I swear, but he's been trying to set you up this whole time. My world shattered all over again. David had turned my affair partner into a pawn in his elaborate scheme. My decision. I left the coffee shop in a daze, clutching the folder of evidence and feeling utterly defeated. David had outsmarted me at every turn, and now I had to figure out how to fight back, not just for myself, but for my children. But I wasn't going to let him win. Not without a fight. I spent the next few days in a fog of humiliation, fury, and desperation. My life had imploded, and David had masterfully orchestrated every second of my downfall. But as I sat in that dingy motel room, staring at the manila folder filled with damning evidence, a singular thought began to burn in my mind: I won't let him win. David wanted to destroy me, to erase me from my children's lives, to paint me as a villain while he walked away as the perfect, wronged hero. If he thought I'd just roll over and let him take Sophia and Ethan, he didn't know me at all. It was time to fight back. The catalyst, the turning point came when my best friend, Alyssa, 35, paralegal, finally picked up my call. Alyssa was one of the few people still willing to hear me out, though her tone made it clear she wasn't thrilled to be dragged into my mess. Karen, she said sharply, you royally screwed up, but if you want to fix this even a little, you need to stop crying and start thinking. I'm trying, Alyssa. But David's got the kids, my family hates me, and he has enough dirt on me to bury me in court. Then you need to get dirt on him, she said, her voice steady and cold. What do you mean? You don't honestly think David's hands are clean in all this, do you? Men like him always have skeletons in their closets. You just need to find them. Alyssa was right. David had always been meticulous, calculating, but nobody was perfect. If he'd been watching me, there was a chance he had secrets of his own. Planting the seeds. The first step in my revenge plan was to regain access to my home, where I knew David kept his most private documents. After some careful thought, I decided to play the only card I had left: guilt. I called David from a burner phone Alyssa had given me. David, please, I begged, my voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. I need to see the kids. Just for an hour. You don't even have to leave the room, I just want to talk to them. There was a long pause before he replied. Fine, tomorrow evening. But don't pull any stunts, Karen. One wrong move, and I'll have the cops escort you out. Perfect. The search. The next evening, I arrived at the house, my heart pounding as I walked through the door. Seeing Sophia and Ethan again was both heartbreaking and motivating. They barely looked at me, their little faces etched with confusion and anger. I wanted to reach out, to explain, but David's icy glare reminded me that this wasn't the time. Instead, I played the role of the remorseful mother, keeping the conversation light and teary-eyed while David hovered like a hawk. But my true goal wasn't the kids, it was his office. After the awkward reunion, I asked to use the bathroom. David hesitated but eventually waved me toward the hallway. Instead of going to the bathroom, I slipped into his office, shutting the door behind me as quietly as possible. I had 10 minutes, maximum. I rifled through drawers, searched his desk, and even checked the trash. At first, I found nothing but mundane paperwork, bills, tax returns, receipts. But then I hit the jackpot: a hidden folder in the back of his filing cabinet labeled personal accounts. Inside were bank statements that made my jaw drop. David had been transferring large sums of money to an offshore account for months, money I had no idea he even had. There were also suspicious transactions tied to a company I didn't recognize, Blackstone Consulting, which seemed to be receiving regular payments from him. What the hell was he hiding? Alyssa's role. I took photos of everything with my phone, then carefully returned the folder to its place. By the time I left the house, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. Alyssa helped me dig deeper into the mysterious company. Turns out, Blackstone Consulting was a shell corporation, and David was using it to hide assets, likely to ensure I wouldn't get a dime if we divorced. Worse, he'd been transferring money there while claiming we were struggling financially. It was the ammunition I needed: leverage and alliances. Armed with this new information, I reached out to someone I never thought I'd call: Marcus Hale, the private investigator David had hired. Mrs. Hayes, he said when I introduced myself, his tone cautious. I assume this isn't a friendly call. Marcus, I know David hired you to dig up dirt on me. I don't care about that anymore. What I want to know is, what else did you find on him? There was a pause, and I could hear him exhale slowly. Why would I help you? Because I'm willing to pay, I said, my voice steady. And because I'm guessing David's been keeping secrets from you, too. It took some convincing and a hefty payment, but Marcus eventually agreed to meet with me. What he shared confirmed my suspicions. David wasn't just hiding money, he was also involved in something shady at work. According to Marcus, several of David's colleagues had left the company suddenly, and rumors of financial misconduct were swirling around him. The plan comes together. By the time I finished piecing everything together, my revenge plan was clear. Expose David's financial secrets. I'd use the offshore accounts and Blackstone Consulting to prove he wasn't the squeaky clean provider he pretended to be. Leverage the kids. If I could show that David's shady dealings made him an unfit parent, I'd have a fighting chance in the custody battle. Turn the tables. I'd play the victim in front of our family and friends, using David's calculated cruelty against him. But I wasn't done yet. I needed one final move to ensure David wouldn't see this coming. Setting the trap. I arranged a meeting with David under the guise of discussing a co-parenting plan. He agreed, likely thinking I was ready to surrender. Little did he know, Alyssa and Marcus were working behind the scenes to leak information about Blackstone Consulting to his employer. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait. When I walked into the cafe for my meeting with David, I was shaking, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. Every piece of my plan was in motion, and this was the final stage. This was the moment I'd watched the meticulously controlled world of David Hayes crumble, just like he had tried to shatter mine. He was already seated, dressed sharply in a navy suit that screamed authority. He glanced up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Karen," he said curtly, motioning to the chair across from him. "You're 5 minutes late. Let's make this quick, I have another meeting in an hour." I smiled sweetly, sitting down and placing my phone face down on the table. "Of course, David. I wouldn't want to waste your precious time." The opening moves. I started with small talk, asking about the kids, pretending to care about his work schedule, and generally playing the role of the humbled, broken ex-wife desperate to negotiate. I let him think he still had the upper hand, that I was too beaten down to fight back. But the moment he leaned back in his chair, smugness oozing from his every pore, I struck. "David," I said, my tone suddenly serious, "there's something I need to talk to you about before we move forward with custody arrangements." His brow furrowed. "What now, Karen?" "I know about Blackstone Consulting," I said softly, watching his face for a reaction. For a split second, his confident mask slipped, his eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and he leaned forward. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, David. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the money you've been funneling through that shell corporation. And I know your company would be very interested to hear about it, too." He froze, his fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You're bluffing." I picked up my phone, scrolling to the folder of photos I'd taken of his financial documents, and slid the device across the table. "Am I?" David's face went pale as he scrolled through the images. "The leaks begin." I leaned back, savoring the rare sight of David speechless. "Here's how this is going to work," I said, my voice steady. "You're going to agree to 50/50 custody of the kids. No fighting, no games. And you're going to give me a generous settlement in the divorce. And if I don't," he snarled, finally finding his voice, "then these documents find their way to your boss, your colleagues, and, oh, I don't know, maybe even the IRS." He glared at me, his mind clearly racing. But before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. "Looks like you're already getting a taste of what's coming," I said innocently. David snatched up his phone, his expression darkening as he read the message. I could see the panic in his eyes. It had started. The public fallout. Behind the scenes, Alyssa and Marcus had done their jobs perfectly. They'd leaked just enough information about Blackstone Consulting to create suspicion without revealing everything. By the time David arrived at work the next morning, the rumor mill was in full swing. Colleagues whispered behind his back, his boss called him into an emergency meeting, and HR began routine audits of his expense reports. I stayed silent, waiting for the chaos to escalate. A few days later, the first major blow landed. David's company placed him on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The family bombshell. But I wasn't done yet. David had weaponized my mistakes to turn my own family against me, and now it was time for payback. I called a family meeting at my parents' house, inviting David to join us under the pretense of clearing the air. My parents, still furious with me for my affair, reluctantly agreed. David walked in confidently, thinking this would be another opportunity to parade himself as the victim. But as soon as he sat down, I pulled out the photos of his financial misconduct and passed them around. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice trembling just enough to seem genuine, "I made mistakes, huge ones. But while I was wrong, David's hands aren't exactly clean either. The room fell silent as my parents and siblings examined the evidence. David, my father finally said, his tone icy, care to explain this? David stammered, his carefully crafted facade cracking under the weight of their scrutiny. This is nothing. Karen's trying to shift the blame. Shift the blame? I interjected, tears streaming down my face for added effect. You lied to all of us, David. You hid money, betrayed our trust, and tried to ruin me just to save your own skin. For the first time, my family looked at me with something other than disdain. The final blow. While David was busy dealing with his crumbling career and the fallout with my family, I made my next move, filing a formal complaint with the IRS. Alyssa had ensured everything was airtight, and within weeks, David found himself under federal investigation. When the news broke, it was all over social media. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers began to distance themselves from him. The once respected David Hayes was now a disgraced fraud. Sophia and Ethan. The hardest part of my revenge was using David's downfall to reconnect with my kids. I knew it was manipulative, but I also knew it was my only chance. I started small, attending their school events and leaving little notes for them, always emphasizing that I loved them no matter what. Over time, as David's life unraveled and his bitterness consumed him, Sophia and Ethan began to see another side of their father. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but slowly, they started letting me back in. By the end of it all, David had lost his job, his reputation, and his ability to control me. When the dust finally settled, I found myself standing amidst the wreckage of everything I had once held dear. David had been ruined, the children had started speaking to me again, and my family was no longer glaring at me with outright disgust. Yet, as I stood there, surveying the pieces, I realized something horrifying: victory didn't taste as sweet as I'd imagined. David's downfall had been meticulously orchestrated, my revenge perfectly executed. But now, in the quiet moments, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all worth it? David's collapse. David's life had become a nightmare, and I won't lie, I took satisfaction in it for a time. His company fired him after their internal investigation, his license as a financial consultant was revoked, and the IRS investigation drained what little money he had left. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved into a tiny apartment on the edge of town. He no longer drove his flashy car, wore designer suits, or carried himself with that air of invincibility. The mighty David Hayes had been reduced to nothing. But his rage, his rage, burned brighter than ever. He couldn't look at me without seething hatred, and every interaction with the kids was tense and bitter. When Ethan and Sophia started spending more time with me, it only fueled his anger. Rebuilding with the kids. Sophia was the first to come around. It started with small, hesitant gestures, a text asking for help with homework, a quick chat after school. Slowly but surely, she began to let me back into her life. Ethan, on the other hand, was a tougher nut to crack. At 15, he had absorbed David's bitterness like a sponge, and every interaction with me was laced with sarcasm and distrust. "You think ruining Dad makes you a good mom?" he snapped at me one evening when I tried to talk to him about his science project. I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to argue. "No, Ethan, I don't, but I'm trying to be better, for you and Sophia." He rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath, but I noticed the way his posture softened, just a little. It was a painfully slow process, but day by day, I chipped away at the walls they had built around themselves. I attended every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. I showed up, even when they didn't want me there, because I needed them to know I wasn't going anywhere. My family's shifting loyalties. Winning back my parents and siblings was another uphill battle. They were still angry, still disappointed, but the revelations about David had changed the dynamic. "You both made mistakes," my mother said one evening as we sat in her kitchen, "but at least you're trying to make things right. David, well, is just spiraling." I nodded, sipping my tea. "I know I hurt all of you. I know I betrayed your trust. But I need you to believe me when I say I'm not that person anymore." My father, who had barely spoken to me since the affair, finally broke his silence. "It'll take time, Karen, but we'll get there." It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a start. David's final move. Just when I thought things were beginning to stabilize, David pulled one last stunt. It happened on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Sophia and Ethan were with me for the weekend, and we were at the park, enjoying a rare moment of peace. David showed up unannounced, his face flushed with anger. "You think you've won, Karen," he spat, marching toward us. "You think you can just destroy my life and walk away scot-free?" I stood my ground, shielding the kids behind me. "David, this isn't the time or place. If you want to talk, we can do it later. Oh, we're talking now, he snapped, his voice rising. You turned my own kids against me. You ruined everything. Dad, stop, Sophia cried, her voice shaking. But David wasn't listening. He kept shouting, his accusations growing more irrational by the second. And then, something I never expected happened. Ethan, the son who had defended David at every turn, stepped forward. You ruined your own life, Dad, he said quietly. Mom didn't make you lie to us. Mom didn't make you hide money or treat us like pawns in your stupid games. That was all you. David froze, his face a mask of shock. For a moment, it looked like he might argue, but then he turned and stormed off without another word. A new beginning. In the weeks that followed, things began to change. Ethan's outburst at the park seemed to mark a turning point in our relationship. He started opening up to me, sharing snippets of his life and even asking for advice. Sophia, always the peacemaker, seemed relieved to see us all moving forward, however slowly. As for David, he faded into the background. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit defeat, but the reality was clear. He had lost his grip on the narrative. The weight of guilt. Despite everything, I couldn't shake the guilt that lingered in the back of my mind. Yes, David had been a terrible husband, but I had set this chain of events in motion with my betrayal. I started therapy, hoping to untangle the mess of emotions I carried. It wasn't easy, facing my flaws and acknowledging the pain I had caused, but it was necessary. Where we stand now. It's been a year since the dust settled, and life looks very different now. I have joint custody of Ethan and Sophia, and while our relationship isn't perfect, it's stronger than it's been in years. My parents and siblings have cautiously welcomed me back into the fold, and I'm working to rebuild their trust. As for David, I don't know where he is. Last I heard, he was living in a small town a few hours away, trying to start over. Do I regret what I did to him? Sometimes. But then I remember the way he weaponized my mistakes, the way he tried to turn my own children into tools of his revenge, and I know I did what I had to do. Life isn't perfect, and it never will be, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm moving forward, not running away, and that's enough.